Welcome back to the Neurologic Wellness Podcast. This is Dr. David Traster, and I'm here with my friend Lucas Rosa. If you can't tell, Lucas Rosa is a fighter, but there's a lot more to Lucas that I want to talk about and dive into because he actually fascinates me a little bit. And I've known a lot of fighters, a lot of pro athletes, but Lucas has an exceptional brain, whether he knows it or not. And from the day I met him, I saw that right away, even though he was a little dinged up. And then it was really remarkable some of the things he can do, and he's early on in his professional career. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, appreciate it. Those are very kind words. Appreciate it, Dr. Traster. Yeah,
So let me just jump into this right now.
sure.
I remember you telling me you studied in Asia the history of fighting, and I don't know if it was a master's degree or it was something where you really kind of dove into the philosophy and the history. And so I'd
Yeah,
like to start there and just tell me a little bit about it, and let's dive into that.
yeah, sure. Yeah, I like grew up from a fighting family and that sort of thing. But what that was specifically was I always had this like issue because I was very academic, like blending my academic side and my intellectual side. And so I ended up applying for something called a Watson Fellowship. Now, a Watson Fellowship is something they give out to 40 people in the country every year. It's a very purely academic grant they give out. And I was one of the 40 students selected for this in the entire country. It's very, very hard to get. And my project was looking at mixed martial arts from a more philosophical perspective, because to me, mixed martial arts was always like a pursuit of knowledge, the same way philosophy was. And a lot of people didn't really see that consistency, and I was kind of this like walking contradiction. But to me, it was always very consistent with each other. And so I got to live in Cambodia for 4 months, studying an ancient martial art called Bokatau. And then I went to did Muay Thai in Thailand, and then did Dutch kickboxing in the Netherlands. And so I kind of studied this sort of lineage of striking, like one sort of part of the branch of striking for a full year. And I had a lot of prior experience in a lot of the grappling martial arts like jujitsu and wrestling, obviously takedowns and those sort of things, but I had never really formally studied striking. So for me, it was a real pleasure, and I got to experience a lot of the culture and how it brought meaning to people's lives and those sort of things. So for me, I was always like super academic. I was a philosophy and creative writing double major. I was like the youngest member of Phi Beta Kappa Academic Honor Society. I was invited to do an honors thesis. I ran the college and high school newspapers when I went there. So like I was always very academic and loved writing and loved philosophy and sort of that pursuit of knowledge. And to me, this was like mixed martial arts was a physical way to manifest that sort of pursuit of knowledge. And
Cool. I joke to people, I talked to a few people about you, and I
that's
joke.
how I always viewed it.
Cool. I joke to people because I say Lucas beats people before they even get in the ring. Like I cycle like like psychologically and knowledge-wise, he's already won. And then he gets in and he beats them in like under a
Yeah.
minute. But let's dive a little deep in that
Yeah.
before we get into your
Yeah.
actual professional career and your fighting and everything. What was the thing that you
Sure, sure.
learned the most or that surprised you when you went over there?
I mean, one of the things I'd say like culturally was the most interesting was Cambodia, just because they have this martial art that is very based, it's sort of it's supposed to be a predecessor to a lot of the Southeast Asian martial arts that, uh, were I mean, a lot of those ones got famous like during the 70s and 80s, and there were a lot of martial arts that got famous during the 70s and 80s. But Bogota was not one of them because they actually had a genocide at the hands of a dictator, Pol Pot. So it was this sort of like ancient martial art that nobody really knows about. And I'm like, really, how fundamental to their culture can it be if nobody knows about it? But I went there, and you literally go to Angkor Wat and these ancient temples, and you see in the temple walls, like techniques carved, people throwing in the temple walls and doing leg locks, and it was just a real honor. And I got to learn from their grandmaster, which is their gold krama, which is basically their highest level of black belt. And I learned under this guy San Kim Sun, who recently passed. I dedicated my last fight to him, but he was someone I learned under for pretty much 4 months. And so to me, that was the most culturally interesting, just because it's this, to me, this fundamental aspect of like striking that nobody really knows about. Like if what they're saying is true, and what I saw at the ancient temple walls seems like it is true, then Bokatao evolves into Muay Baran, which evolves into Muay Thai, which Muay Thai combines with Kaoshin Karate to become ditch kickboxing, which becomes modern kickboxing, which plays a fundamental role in MMA, which we're seeing today. So like it's sort of this fundamental part of the sport that is dates back thousands of years to the Kumai Empire that I feel like a lot of people didn't know. So like for me, that was culturally the most interesting. Um, the thing that I always loved about martial arts was also just how differently people express themselves through it. Like I feel like in some way we're all using it as a medium to become our most authentic selves. And I saw that in a lot of different ways, like just, not even necessarily through all the fighters I met, but even just people who were there to, try it for like tourism or those sort of things, or people who maybe it wasn't their like profession, but it was something that sort of they garnered meaning from. And it's really interesting to see because it's a type of hobby that you have to do that immediately puts you in a vulnerable state. So it's like you really have to give your whole self to it, in a way. And that's always what drew me to martial arts. Like I've had a lot of difficult things happen in my life, and I felt like martial arts was one of the only places that I could be vulnerable. So
Let me ask you this, because obviously you said it's almost like a foundation that then evolved. Was there
yeah,
something about that technique that was different or unique that you learned? And then did it get watered down or were things added to it? Or how did it
yeah,
start? And then what was unique or important to you? And then as it evolved, do you think like did it evolve in a good way or bad way? Was it just different? Like how would you
yeah.
say that evolution went?
Right. So, Bokatao, traditionally it had all these different aspects to it that, like, were fundamental in the Kumai Empire, the way that they battled even on the battlefield. So, like, they had parts of it that, like, I didn't even mess with really, but like weapons and things like that, you
Yeah.
know. But they also had grappling and takedowns, which, if you look at Muay Thai is, called the art of eight limbs because they use their hands, their feet, their knees, and their elbows. So it's more of only a striking martial art. So Bokatao, in a way, sort of got stripped down to a more accessible like thing in terms of just striking and something that's easier to sort of market as like a tourism activity. But Bokatao itself, is supposedly this like very ancient martial art, and it was based on different actual like animal styles. Like the original way that Bokatao evolved was they supposedly were looking at like animals in the wild and in the jungle, and they would try to look at their survival techniques and base like different grappling and takedown techniques on that. So they had like boar style, they had like tiger style, which they said I did pretty good. So it was like I literally in some ways felt like very like I was in a movie in terms of just like how traditional this was that, and it was sort of this like sort of I call it the lost martial art, or nearly lost martial art, and it's like hidden in a way, and that I thought was really cool. But yeah, it got stripped down a little bit into more of just a striking style, and I'd say some of the best things that I learned, because some of it is more traditional and cultural, so I don't know that it could technically be like immediately applicable to MMA, the things that I do, but they do have very interesting elbows that I've tried to implement in some of my fights, and
Well,
also jumping techniques. So
so let's jump into philosophy real quick.
yeah,
My observation is I'm not a fighter, but I'm
yeah,
42 and I've never seen fighting more popular. Right. When I grew up, boxing was pretty big.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right
yeah,
now, like martial arts and jujitsu, I've never seen more people who didn't grow up with it
yeah,
try to get into that type of art form or exercise. At the same time, as a society, it seems like there's this narrative that like masculinity is not the best thing. Right. And so
right,
it's almost like in society, there's a global narrative that's kind of anti-masculinity, but it seems like more men and women, but especially men, are jumping into more physical type exercise and more fighting and these type of things. So from your perspective, living it your whole life and kind of seeing this evolution, how popular it's gotten just for the average person, what's your take on this whole thing?
yeah. I mean, I'd say there's some parts of it that like I'm always it's funny that you even say that because sometimes I think I'm like, am I in just an echo chamber? Like, is things really getting that popular? Or have
Yeah.
I just lived my whole life like this? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's like the fastest growing sport. But it's kind of reassuring almost to hear you say that because it's like, Yeah, I do think it's this very fast growing sport, and I think a lot of people are starting to see how, it's not just a to me, one of the things that was big about it was just not just the physical challenge of it, but the mental aspect, like how it was just such uh, a difficult you had to be creative. Like I thought it brought out a lot of the virtues that like I found most meaningful, like creativity, like mental dexterity, like things that you have to work through. And it's not like you're just going for a run and you have to just like be sitting there with your own thoughts. It's more you have to work and evolve and create and grow and think through problems. And I felt like that's part of what I loved about the martial arts. And on top of that, it's like a never ending quest because you had to again have that pursuit of knowledge. I do think there's something sort of getting lost a little bit in terms of like I don't love aspects of the fan base or the martial arts community where it's sort of becoming more about um this echo chamber of like just physical fitness or that sort of thing. I think we need to really reevaluate it more as like this is supposed to bring out the best parts of yourself, whatever that is. And yeah, I don't love like some of the ways that there's been, I think, different figures that have come from the MMA community. Like I'm not a like I don't like Andrew Tate and those sorts of things. Like there's things like that I don't like agree with necessarily. And I do think the like martial arts community sometimes can be a little like, especially fighter community, can be a little less progressive in their thoughts. So like I feel like we do need to sort of pull that like mind aspect back into it a little. But
So let me
yeah,
ask you this, since you brought it up. I don't know a
yeah,
lot of fighters, but the most of the fighters I've met are like really, really nice human beings, right?
yeah, yeah,
You would almost expect them to just not be as nice or not be
yeah,
as caring or kind.
yeah,
What's been your experience living it and why? Like, I think the same thing pro athlete, pro football, you get this perception and you think you see them in the ring, you see them in their sport, you think that's just who they are. But
yeah.
my reality has been almost the opposite. Is these are some of the nicest people I've met. So
Yeah.
what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny people because people say they're like, "Man, you're such a polite kid," and then when you go in there, you look like a complete psycho. And I think I have a little like extra, I my walkout and everything. The mentality I have to get into fight is like, I really go full. They call me King of Monsters because I go crazy in a way. But but yeah, I mean, I think one of the parts of martial arts is it humbles you immediately. Like, there's no, I think even if you're a really good um at like certain other sports, you can start off really good and never really get humbled because it's like one sort of objective task. But there's so many aspects to mixed martial arts that like even if I was the best boxer in the world, which I'm not, but if I was, there's ways around I could feel great every session. But then when I go into the world of wrestling, which I have to do because I have to become a well-rounded martial artist, you get humbled immediately. So I feel like there's a part of it where like it sort of, doesn't break you down, but it sort of brings you back to like reality of like, hey, these are my deficiencies. Like I have to be to get to the level of becoming a really good fighter, you have to in some ways be willing to accept the things that you don't know, which I always view as like Socratic wisdom in some ways. And so I think like, there's that aspect to it. And I think you know, fighters in that way are people who have to really at the highest level have to be okay with accepting what they don't know and then improving on that and sort of trying to bring out their best self.
I guess it's nothing more motivating than getting punched in the face. So
Yeah.
tell me, how does being a fighter and kind of being competitive, how does it relate to your organization and your everyday life? Because like you said, if you don't keep on it, you're going to slip and someone else is working hard to take your
Yeah.
spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough. I mean, they honestly say it's a very lonely lifestyle, and I'll be honest, it is in some ways. Like there's the sacrifices you have to make, and this sort of obsessive. Like, I mean, I have to be obsessive, but I think maybe there's other people who are just talented. You know, and athletically gifted. I think I have my traits that I try to use. My grandfather always said, "Win with what you got." So I do think I have traits that like lend themselves to some parts of this, but ultimately you have to be completely obsessed with it, and I think it can be a difficult lifestyle. Like I wake up every morning and the first thing I see is I put a piece of tape on my wall that says the next goal. So usually uh before my last fight it said pro MMA 7-0. And that's my goal, for every day I wake up with that goal in mind, like thinking about like what I have to accomplish. And I see that before I go to sleep every night. Like, was this a good day? Was this a day that I was working towards my ultimate obsession? And yeah, so it can be tough. Like there's a lot of sacrifices to have to make. I don't, everyone sees it as like, oh, you're living in sunny South Florida, but it's more like, I don't get to see my fiance who's, getting her own PhD in philosophy right now. And I don't get to, see my twin brother who lives up north. I don't get to see my family quite as much. I don't have social interactions. Like, you know what I mean? There's things as much like as I would, I have to skip certain holidays. I can't eat on I have to go to kale jail, which, is what I call my diet, like during, Thanksgiving or like Christmas and stuff. So there's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made. And, you know, to me, at the end of the day, it's like it is a privilege to be able to do what I love every day, though. So, and, to be able to walk around my hometown with a title belt and have kids want to take photos with me is like so beyond surreal that, I think those sorts of moments do make it worth it. But yeah, you have to be so completely focused. If there's a problem, I can't like meddle around with it. I have to be like, what's the solution? Get there as quick as possible. And yeah, it's every day is like that. So
So one, because I found that interesting. I'm a believer that 99.9% of success is mindset, right? It
yeah,
starts
yeah,
with mindset. It starts with your reality, your psychology, and your beliefs.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
start with your beliefs, and that turns into action. So why don't you take us through a typical day
yeah,
from, like you said, waking up, your mindset. What do you do for your mind? What do you do for your
yeah.
body? What do you do for your training? What do you do for your diet? Like, what's a typical day look like for a high level fighter?
Yeah, I mean, it depends like whether you're in fight camp or not. But for me, I wake up and I immediately usually it depends how I feel, but I'll usually have like some sort of like Greek yogurt or that sort of thing. I'll down a little bit of this. It's Exalt. It's like a new thing I got sponsored by, but they basically have like nutrients that actually get into the brain in the way that the brain can absorb it. So that's something that like I've always been very keen on doing. And once I do that, I head to the gym. I get there like usually for me, I get there like 30 minutes early every day. Sometimes even today, even like I got there and the place was locked because I got there so early. So like sometimes it's that sort of thing. I like work on my footwork. Usually I'll do like an MMA class. Followed by a little bit of either I'll stay on the bag myself or I'll work with my older brother or my coach Matt Waggy or my coach Charles McCarthy. Um, and usually I do like two classes in a row. And usually at night I'll end up doing some sort of cardio. I do hard pool workouts for myself to get my cardio. I'll do like pool sprints or that sort of thing, or I'll go to this place called MMA Science to kind of work on. Uh, a lot of striking has in MMA especially has become less focused on just punching and kicks and more on distance control. So it's more of like a conceptual game now, with the way that you're kind of managing distance. So there's a lot more advanced footwork than there was, more advanced footwork than there was maybe even like 5 years ago. So there's those sorts of things that you have to work as well in terms of that like aspect of it. So um, yeah, I mean, I in between sessions, I have to focus very hard. Like if I'm nursing an injury, I have to go to PT sessions. I have to, you know, for me, my solution to a lot of things is just sleep more. I see a lot of people, they go to cryo and these sort of things, and I think they do work in some ways, but I think sleep is a very good way to recover as well. Um, and yeah, I as different problems come up, I address them. But in my free time, I spend a lot of time just, messaging different promoters, looking up opponents, watching film. I became, especially in the past year, very obsessed in a way with not just the aspect of fighting, the fight part itself, the physical part, but also the part of like networking and connections is a big part that people don't really talk about, and is not my favorite part of it, but it's something that's very important. So sometimes I'll just go into this sort of like, not manic, but like almost this obsessive thing of like, um, um, looking at film for 3 hours straight, or like, looking up opponents and all uh, uh, these different sort of like fight styles that I can, emulate, or matchups that I could potentially take. Like a lot of, honestly, my first 7 pro fights, I'd say 6 of them like had come as a direct result of me, um, like talking to the promoters and like reaching out to different potential opponents and these sorts of things. So like it's sort of a lot different than people might, imagine with like, an NFL player, they just have an agent and that sort of thing. So yeah.
And that was my next question. You kind of led me to it, is that when you look at the world of fighting or MMA or even UFC, I guess to an extent, when you look at these type of things,
Yeah.
are you looking at the competition? Are you comparing yourself to other people? Are you looking at it more as like I could train with them, I could learn from them? Are you looking
Yeah.
more like jealousy, I want to beat them? Are you putting a list of people you're trying to take down? Versus are you more just focusing on yourself and just trying to figure out how to get better from other people, not necessarily comparing?
No, I mean, my mentality on it is like, improvement over everything, and like, win at all costs in a way.
Mhm.
So for me, I don't try to think about too much of like the comparison game. Obviously, I think that's something that like my coaches will put me through sometimes. They'll like, be like, all right, we're going to put him against him and see how he does. But for me, my assessment is just like improving on the things that I know need work. Like I just, I had my first 6 pro fights went really well. I submitted everybody in the first within 2 minutes. But my last fight I did win, but it was a lot more of a bloody affair, and like Friday the 13th, sort of like, I got, 15 stitches against a 6'2", no, 6'3", like, really high level striker. And after that, my coaches said, hey, you have to go train in the Netherlands, Dutch kickboxing, because they have some of the tallest fighters and some of the best kickboxers on the planet. And so, it's sort of, you go where you can to learn. And so when I like, especially in South Florida, there's so much. It's for me the capital of the world when it comes to MMA. That's why I live down here. So when you're around that much, talent and that much knowledge, I try to pick it up from wherever I can. I don't really have an ego about those sorts of things. I think sometimes, especially older school thinking, they are very myopic, in how they'll take knowledge and that sort of thing. But me, I'm someone who, I just try to take knowledge from wherever I can find it. And even if it's like someone who who maybe they think they know more than me, but like maybe he doesn't really realize I'm like a 7-0 professional fighter. Like sometimes that happens. I'll just be like, yeah, yeah, what? And then I'll observe them and I'll be like, wow, this guy actually knows how to stretch really well. Like I could get something from anybody. And I think the truth of MMA is that you can make any technique work if you really believe in it well enough, and repeat it well enough. So
And then how much weight are you putting on to like, obviously you're undefeated right now, but you're obviously
yeah,
working really hard, right? And so how much
yeah, yeah,
weight are you putting on outcomes and results versus the process every day, right? Because you could do everything every day and do the best you can do. But some people
yeah.
lose sight of that and they're results driven, which could be a little bit of a dangerous game.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a dangerous game. I try to weigh it a little bit. Like obviously, I wake up and see that goal, but to me, it's more of just a reminder of like, hey, did you do everything you could to improve yourself today? And so that's kind of like for me, I have this sort of mantra of like improvement over everything. Like I really think it's as much as it is about, the results. I think usually if you do the right things, positive things happen. And obviously when you get to the highest level, sometimes it's like, man, you have 2 people who are both doing the right things, and like it's one person has to win and one person has to lose. And so for me, the thing that gives me, people always ask me, are you afraid when you go in the cage? And I say, like, anybody who says they're not afraid is lying. But for me, something that gives me a real comfort before I walk in there is is there's like comfort in the preparation. Like the preparation takes away a lot of the fear. And so I know in my heart that like I will fight like pretty much to the death, like if I need to. Um, and so I know that I'm going to try my hardest in the fight. And so what gives me comfort is that I've done all the preparation leading up to that. And I can honestly say to myself, like, you've done as much as you could do. And now all you have to do is go in there and try your best, which I know I'm going to do. So, like, there is that aspect of like, did you prepare as best as you could? And, sometimes I get like different recommendations from different people who I feel like, oh, this guy's not working harder than me, or this guy's been kind of inconsistent. Like, but for me, it's about, again, it's not just about being like, not only the hardest worker, but having that open mindedness enough to be able to be like, okay, even if this guy maybe hasn't been the most consistent, is what they're saying logical? Does it make sense? Will it improve myself? So there's a lot of things you have to do sometimes. Like, am I humble enough to accept advice from this person? Do I really want to put in the work to go to this new thing? Do I want to put myself in an uncomfortable position to go to this gym or go to the Netherlands, or then when I'm in the Netherlands, change course and go to a different gym that I wasn't going to before? And train with like class A kickboxers where it might be a little bit more of a like edgy environment. So like there's that sort of thing where you have to be willing to make like all those different sacrifices and be adaptable. And that's something that I've kind of learned more in the past year and a half than I think I did as an amateur fighter.
Cool. And before we jump into how we met, why don't we take a second out of respect and talk a little about your mentor you said just passed away? And why don't you
Yeah,
talk a little about him, his life, and kind of, his experience, how he grew up, and just give us like a little bit of a window
yeah.
into,
So San
because he
Kim,
sounded like a really special guy. So why don't you tell us a little bit about him?
yeah. So San Kim's son, he never ended up being like one of my formal MMA coaches or anything like that. Like that's my brother Charles Rosa, my coach Matt Waggy, and my coach Charles McCarthy, and everyone at American Combat Gym and MMA Science. But he was very instrumental in like really my first introduction to like training at a higher level and learning everything I did at the Watson. And his name was San Kim Sun. He for years was a Bokatau practitioner in Cambodia. And when Pol Pot, who was a dictator in Cambodia, came, he came with the Khmer Rouge, which was this sort of political affiliation that quickly got out of hand, and they started, committing basically one of the worst genocides of the millennia. And they ended up killing a lot of the teachers in a way. They wanted to like kind of keep the people very subservient and that sort of thing. And so they tried to wipe out a lot of knowledge, a lot of history. And so, because in other cultures, again, like martial arts is kind of viewed in that more intellectual way, which it ought to be. They viewed though the martial arts instructors as teachers and that sort of thing. And so San Kim Sun for a long time had to flee the Khmer Rouge. He told me about how he had he had to flee, and he actually told me he at one point had to like literally eat grass and like find animals like frogs and stuff that he could capture and like basically eat to prevent from starving for a month. And he eventually fled. I think he lived in California for maybe I think 20 years with his son Reach, who Reach is a black karma, and that's like their black belt. But Grandmaster Sun Kim Sun reached the level of gold krama, and so he ended up eventually returning to Cambodia to resurrect this lost martial art. And it was still a very dangerous thing for him to do because even after Pol Pot came out, I can imagine the trauma of having to go back to that country and feel like, is it still safe? And in some ways, there is still corruption there, to be honest. And so he would teach a lot of younger students the ways of Bokatau, and he was pretty much trying to do whatever he could to spread the word of Bokatown, and sometimes at his own cost. Like it wasn't like he lived really great means. Like it wasn't like the government of Cambodia gave a ton of support to this. Um, because they still have some of their own problems. But I try to survive Bo-Katan, even though sometimes I barely survive myself. And he was a really special guy. And, him and now his son Reach, recently, they gave me before he passed away, they did give me a certificate of appreciation for spreading, Bo-Katan. And I think they're starting to make more of a committee out of it that I think they want me to be some sort of board member on. His son Reach is really going to start, like, I think trying to spread Bo-Katan in a more like marketable way in the 2020s. So it'll be really interesting to see where it goes. And I think for me, I'm like you know it's interesting how things work. Like, I always thought to myself, like, if I ever got to be a professional MMA fighter at a high level, like, I would really want to spread that fundamental story. And here I am. So I'm trying to do what I think is my duty as a martial artist. And Sam Ken Sum, he passed away, I think a week before my last fight. And I was happy that I fought my heart out in that last fight. It was a really difficult fight. And I felt like I had a little bit of help from upstairs. So
Amazing. And then Dutch, right? Dutch boxing, kickboxing. You might not know this.
yeah, yeah.
I taught in Amsterdam every other month for about a year or two. I also
Oh,
proposed to my
wow.
wife in Amsterdam, right? So Amsterdam is a
Oh,
little bit of a
amazing.
special place. It's beautiful, right? I love the Netherlands. I love Amsterdam. The people
Yeah,
are
yeah,
friendly. They're very tall, to your
yeah.
point. So what
Yep.
was what was your experience there and training there?
Yeah, so I trained there a little bit on the Watson, but honestly, back then I didn't know enough to really absorb. Like, you don't know what you don't know, so like I wasn't as high level as I am now. Um, Recently, I went there the past 3 months and I trained up in Friesland, which is like, they almost don't even associate themselves with the rest of the Netherlands. They're kind of like more this sort of farmland and that sort of thing. And I think out of all of the Netherlands, they have the tallest of the tall. So like I would see 16-year-olds who were like, 6'3" and like, sparring like people who, at the end I think they were like full adults and they were only like 19-year-old kids, but they have really, really high level kickboxers there. And I trained at Kyoku Gym um, in Leeuwarden under Stefan Birkenboss, and he's someone who he helped my brother. He cornered one of my brother's kickboxing old school trainer there. His instructor as well, Hans Struzma, helped me quite a lot. On top of that, I then went down to the northern Netherlands in Den Bosch, which is a really interesting city, and trained with Andy Sauer, who's like a kickboxing legend. And so they had you know, a lot of like class A kickboxers that I trained with as well. And I'd say the thing about like the Dutch style is it's very based on like angles. It's very like the strikes are all very powerful. They're not like meant to just like set things up or tap. Like you're really going in there with the intention to um, like take out your opponent whenever you punch and kick. And so their style is very like angular and powerful. And they use rotation, that striking style, and it's honestly like devastating.
Cool. And then, so why don't we jump into your history? How'd you get into fighting? How'd you grow up?
Yeah,
Obviously, you mentioned your brother, your brother fight.
yeah,
You mentioned your grandfather. Like, how deep does it go in your family?
yeah,
You mentioned some hard times growing up. If
yeah,
you can, share whatever you're willing to share
yeah,
about how do you go from a kid from Boston, right? You're from Boston. Um,
yeah,
if,
yeah,
if I
boss.
remember correctly, so you're up in Boston. How do you go from there to a top level fighter?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just first start off. I came from a very like, this big Italian Irish family. Like we're very fighter oriented. My dad, could have been a high level fighter, but he had kids at a very young age, so he had like other sort of obligations to do. But he's a very high level striker. And I have my uncle Tommy, as they call him, Tom the Bomb Rosa. He's actually getting into the Masters Boxing Hall of Fame very soon. So he's very high level as well. My grandfather boxed in the Navy and that sort of thing. He was I think Navy champion. So there is like a background as well throughout my family. But growing up, like that, I always knew I wanted to be a fighter somehow, just because of like how I was brought up. Like my dad just had a lot of like discipline, and I just saw like for me, it was the sport that I felt required the most willpower, which I felt like was a trait that was really instilled in me very young. And so, I would wrestle with my twin brother on the trampoline and stuff. That's kind of where it really started. But then I ended up becoming I did self-defense jujitsu, and then I ended up becoming a state champion wrestler in high school. Like I was a two-year captain, and then I did rugby in college, which I was a 3-year captain. So it was kind of like, for me, it was more about like, uh, I felt like I was a pretty good leader, and I always loved the competitiveness of those sports. But in the back of my mind, and I don't know why I used to think this, but in the back of my mind, I always said, like, even when I would get out in like a gym class or something, if someone got me out in dodgeball, I just had this thought of, man, they have no idea they just got out a future like MMA champion. Like, I don't know what came like why I thought that, but I just had that like idea. And you know, I'd say the reason why I really sort of started to obsess into martial arts was I had two older brothers. Like my eldest, they were, while I was like 9 years old, my older brother Vincent was, I think, 18, and my brother Dominic was 23. So to me, they were like kind of my heroes. And unfortunately, they were very good kids, but they dealt with a lot of their own mental health struggles, and they ended up um, having they overdosed on drugs, and both of them, one when I was 9, one when I was 10, and they unfortunately passed away, both of them. And so they were kind of my heroes that I lost. And since then, our family has done a lot of work in the New England community. Like my father, and my mom, they run Chucky's Fight, which is a organization that helps prevent substance abuse in the area. And so they've made a huge impact. Like even when I go home, people come up to me and they tell me like, "Hey, your parents, they've saved my life. They're like second parents to me." And it's pretty interesting because a lot of these people are people I don't even know, and that sort of thing. So, but how it affected me personally was that, I feel like there's a tendency when you have trauma and like tragedies that happen in your life to sort of want to like pull back. And it took me a while to sort of realize that, like, the most meaningful parts of life are the ones that you are able to invest in and still know that they're sort of impermanent. Like whether it's a person, whether it's a pursuit, whether it's a goal or a relationship. Like I think it requires you to invest fully in it if you want it to be meaningful. And that's something that I feel like sometimes tragedies kind of prevent you from wanting to invest fully. And for me, martial arts was one of the ways that I just automatically had to do that. And so I feel like it sort of retrained me to start to reinvest, like, my full, my full like effort into all the different parts of my life, but particularly in martial arts. And it was a place where I felt I could be vulnerable in my most authentic self. And um, yeah, I felt like it brought out the virtues that I wanted to be known for, the virtues that I felt was, the best version of me. And in a way, as I started to, really pick it up, I thought like, this could be a way in which, I can show that I'm affected by tragedy, but not defined by it. And in some ways, my older brother did the same thing. He before I was even really started competing or anything, he actually became an MMA fighter as well, and he got to the highest levels of the UFC. And he's 10 years older than me, so I was still younger when that happened. I was, I think, just starting my academic journey. But and I do think we do it for different reasons in some ways, but. Uh, like he kind of showed me, he didn't really motivate me to do it, it was just he showed me what was possible through it. And so I thought to myself, like if I can not only have these pursuits that bring out the best in me, but I can also show other people by doing this and competing at the highest level, then that's what I want to do with my life. And so from there, I feel like I've been a pretty good ambassador for, like I said, like Boca Tau, and I got that Watson Fellowship, which again sort of combined, I felt like, my academic sides and my you know athletic sides. And I think with that too, it's the first academic grant that's ever been given for something MMA based, which I think, especially in today's world now, that's a pretty big, I think, like, token of, showing like, how much I give to the sport. And yeah, from there, I ended up, after the Watson, I moved back home, and after a while was like, I think I really have to step things up, and I wanted to move to South Florida, which in my mind again is the capital of MMA. And so I moved to South Florida, and under the guidance of Charles McCarthy, my brother Charles Rosa, and Matt Waggy, I ended up becoming like the top amateur in the country. I had 18 amateur fights and 4 titles, and within like a 2.5 year span, I think. And and then from I think at the very tail end of that is when I ended up meeting you. But and since that point, since you kind of fixed me, I became a professional MMA fighter, and in a 1 year span, I fought 7 times, which is incredibly unusual for an MMA fighter, especially at a high level. But yeah, I fought 7 fights, kind of helped get them all through my coaches, but a little bit through my own, know-how and dealing with promoters. But I got to 7-0 with 6 first-round finishes. So right now I'm undefeated, and looking for my next fight, hopefully in late November or December here. So
Cool. And before we jump into how we met and a little bit with us, and again, feel free to talk or not talk as much as you're willing to, right?
sure, sure.
But obviously, I deal with the brain, and part of the brain is psychology, mental health.
Yeah,
You know, concussions can increase your risk of addictions and mental health issues, right?
yeah, yeah, right.
These things alone kind of all blend together.
Yeah,
You've got an older brother you talked about, Charles, who fights. You've got a twin
yeah,
brother. You've
yeah,
all experienced the same thing, but people handle things differently or motivated differently.
yeah,
And people respond to things differently, which I'm always fascinated about. How
yeah,
two things can, or one thing can happen to two people, but they
yeah,
can just react completely different. And one thing can motivate someone to be a champion, and
yeah,
the other could turn someone to a drug addict, right? And
yeah,
it
yeah.
can go either way. So if you want, just from the family dynamic side, how is your response different than some of your family? How did it all? Because that's really hard, man, and it's really
Yeah.
difficult. So like how'd you guys come out the other end?
Yeah, I mean it's tough. Like, I think I chose, I like my personal choice was in terms of like dealing with even, what I've seen in terms of addiction from my family. I was like, I realized very logically, and I don't know why I chose this at such a logical decision at my young age, or why I thought about it in this way, but I thought, this is going to be a problem that I will have to like bat off. Like if I get into it, it's going to be like, why would I introduce this problem into my life? I've seen how it's taken the most strong-willed, stubborn people that I knew in my entire life and brought them down. So like it can't be good, especially because I know myself, I'm an obsessive personality. I'm, even you could say it's an addictive personality, but so there's things in my mind. I just was like, I'm never doing anything. So I've never had a sip of alcohol in my life. I've never had a puff of anything. Like I've never had any drugs. To be honest, I've never even had like a cup of coffee or an energy drink, which people don't believe me when I say that, but I'm like, it's true. Like I really haven't. So, um, yeah, there's just a part of me where I just like, I know I'm prone to those sort of things. And so I'm like, I have to channel that stubbornness and that energy elsewhere. And, I don't want to speak too much for my siblings, but I think they all just handled it in different ways. And I think we've all sort of like tried to bring out the best version of ourselves. Like my twin brother, Francis Rosa, he writes, he's a writer, so he didn't turn to martial arts. He turned almost the exact like opposite in some ways, even though we're identical twins. And I find that really cool. In some ways, he gets his stories and fictional stuff published in literary magazines.
Well, I'll
So
try and get it on. It's not working. Hold
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah, no, yeah, oh yeah. So
There
yeah,
we
that was
go.
yeah. There we go. Yeah.
So why don't you
So
talk about
that's
this book? Let's jump into it. You mentioned him. So what is this
yeah,
book about that I'm holding up that is
yeah.
disappearing in the background?
Yeah, so my twin brother Francis, we used to become fixated on different things, and one of the things was cryptids, which is like mythology and folklore from different cultures. Like obviously biggest ones like Bigfoot, Loch Ness monster. Not that we necessarily believed in all of this stuff, but we thought it was very interesting that all these cultures have all these different cryptids, and some of them in the world have been proven real, eventually, like things like the coelacanth, which people thought was a fish that was extinct for like millions of years, and people kept reporting it, and scientists were like, no, that can't be true because it's extinct. And so that book is basically just an encyclopedia. Each page is a different cryptid, and it's actually a children's book as well that did really well. We would go to different schools and do presentations on it, and yeah, we found we didn't know we were writing for a children's audience. I still think adults can read it and enjoy it, but like we found out very quickly that the people that liked it the most were the ones, the age we were at when we originally started it, which was we were 13 about. And so like I'd say the age of 8 to 13 is usually where a lot of the children who like it the most. And we eventually got it published at 16. And I helped my brother a lot, but I'd say like Francis was really the one who spearheaded that. And I helped quite a bit, but it
So
was
give me some interesting facts or things that you learned right in that book.
yeah, no, I mean, I'd say like just I mean one of the like I said, but it's just interesting how many of the ones that were proven real turn out to be sort of like a nugget of something that's true that ends up being, you know, you know, later on like hyperbolized in some way, but the truth of it is there. And so like things like even like Komodo dragons, originally people like, wait, you're seeing this creature that like can kill anything in one bite and is only on this one dragon island, like okay, but then it turns out Komodo dragons, they're a type of like huge lizard that with one bite has like 72 different types of bacteria in it that can kill even like a water buffalo very quickly. So there's things like that I just found so fascinating, that there was these nuggets of truth. I mean, personally, I think some of the cryptids that I found most interesting, though, to be honest, were ones that like a ton of people saw on one night, one individual night or something, and then like disappeared forever. And you're like, what the heck was that? It's like things like there's something called the Dover Demon, where like everyone gave the exact same description from like many different locations of this like creature in the Dover area in Massachusetts. Another one is the Flatwoods Monster, which is, I don't know. It just, to me, it's almost like this Twilight Zone blip that like, what was that? It was there and then gone, and then tons of people like have all these different reports of it, like almost the same thing. And I don't know, just mysteries like that. It interested me, and that's actually part of the reason why too I got the fight name King of Monsters. Part of it was obsession with Godzilla when I was younger, but also because we wrote this book on cryptids. So
But it is interesting, like in general, there's stories that have been passed down and talked about for generations, and
yeah,
sometimes it's the same story in two completely different parts of the world.
yeah,
That they
right,
have
yeah,
no
yeah,
real way of communicating that, but they had a similar experience. The artwork looks similar. You see
yeah, yeah, yeah,
pictures, you
yeah,
see different things that you ask
yeah. There's a
sometimes,
lot of
like, how long has this been going on for? Like,
yeah.
what do we really don't know?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot like it almost seems like there's a lake monster at every different lake, and they all look the same. They all look like a plesiosaur, which is like a dinosaur. It's there's things like the Moke and like the Congo that matches a lot of like descriptions of like sauropods when they didn't even know like what dinosaurs were. There's just a lot of, and even like the descriptions of different Bigfoot type creatures, and there's like the Yeti and the Himalayan mountain regions, and like the Yowie in the Australian regions. And so yeah, I mean I haven't nerded out about this stuff in a long time, but it's all starting to come back to me now. But I did enjoy that stuff quite a lot.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something you might not know about me, but I was sick for a long time, not diagnosed. And for most of my 20s, I thought I was going to die every night because no one could tell me what was wrong with me. But I lost my Division I scholarship opportunities in high school. I didn't play basketball my senior year. I got hurt. I tried playing after my senior year and I just wasn't good. Like I couldn't move. I was sick. And it was just really, I didn't know what was wrong with me. So it was just embarrassing because I couldn't even, my whole life play basketball. I got to a level I wanted to be at, but I couldn't do it. Right. And
Yeah.
so I had my own mental health issues then. But
Yeah.
for a while, I realized I thought I knew everything as a teenager. And in my 20s, I realized how little I knew. And I
Yeah.
made the decision 'cause I was stuck in bed every day. I'm just going to read because at least if I'm going to die, I want to have more information. And
Yeah.
so I've dove into some of those stories independently, or,
Oh wow.
everything from the monsters, to aliens, to God, to who are we?
Yeah.
How do we see all those questions that
Oh,
I think we're overconfident we know what's going on in the world. And I think
yeah.
the more you look at things, the more you realize how little we know.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what your book interests me because it's all these, I like that. It's all these stories that we tend to think we know everything because our technology is better. But
Yeah.
if anything, the technology might have made us a little dumber.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It makes it, and then like it, even in some ways, then it just shows us how much we actually don't know. Like,
Mhm. And
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
it's crazy. So let's go into how we met, right? Because I'll tell you my side of it, and if you're open to me telling
Sure.
you my side, I'm happy to do it. But
Sure.
at least from the
Yeah.
beginning, I got a message from you, and you were interested in doing neurovisual training for your brain. And I thought to myself, how many MMA fighters who I've seen who aren't severely concussed are reaching out to me for performance enhancement to make their brain better? And that's what intrigued me about you from the beginning. And then we worked together a little bit. And then, like everyone, we've all got our strengths and weaknesses. And so at the time, you had a couple issues, your eyes closed, bending over, a couple things.
Yeah.
And then, that was able, luckily, to be fixed pretty quickly. And then we did some hyperbaric and just kind of boosted you while you were training. So let me get your perception of everything.
Yeah, no, I mean, always had this huge interest in like neuro visual, training, just because, again, I don't think the most athletically gifted. I think, my strengths are maybe my creativity and my, strong-willedness, but it's a lot of these abstract things that you can't really measure. And so I'm like, well, I also think one of my things is sort of my brain, my capacity to, strategize before the fight, but also, I do want to make it that my brain as this, organ can operate in a better way. And so you guys were on my radar for a while. I know you guys had kind of were newer opening up in Boca Raton. When I first reached out, I think you had only been there a year and a half, but you guys had been on my radar, like for sure. I was like, I need to get in. I need to get in. I need to get in. And then eventually, I actually had my final amateur MMA fight. And I was fighting the best guy in Alabama and Louisiana. Like he was the number one ranked, and I was fighting him in Birmingham. So it was like, I was getting booed as I came out. The ref came up to me as I was walking out and saying, "I'm gonna mess you up." He said, "You swore." He said, "You swore 2 times already. You swear one more time, I'm gonna start deducting points from you." And I was like, "Oh man." I'm like, I need to. This is like, they're definitely, did not want me to win,
It's
and
like the
but I
50s
ended
all
up
over
going.
again.
Yeah, exactly. But I ended up going in the fight and I performed great. They said one of the rounds was maybe even 10-8. Like I really did really good. But it was the first time in my life where I got a takedown on me. And I guess something must have happened because I didn't get hit that hard in the fight, but something must have happened where I got jarred from the takedown. Even though in the fight it looks like nothing happens, I just get up from the takedown and reverse the position and I'm beating him up. But I gave this big, long, eloquent post-fight speech and everything, and then apparently, as soon as I walked out of the cage, I looked over at my buddy and I said, "I don't remember any of the fight. What happened?" And he said, "Are you joking? Like we just got out. Like you just gave a post-fight speech. Like what is?" And I when I got to the back, I guess I kept repeating things. I even looked at like honestly, the first thing that I remember from my long-term memory of like, okay, what happened, like when it started, my memory restarts again, is I remember looking down and seeing a big title belt in my lap. And I remember thinking I was in a dream because I was like, there's no way, like, you don't wake up from in a good like whenever that happens and you wake up after a fight, it's usually like, oh, you got like, it's never happened to me, but like, oh, you got knocked out or something like that. But I was waking up in the back with the title belt. I'm like, is this a dream? I was asking the kid next to me. He's like, you asked me this like 7 times already. And I was like, okay. And so I knew, something was up enough that I was like, okay, you probably got concussed in some ways, but some people were maybe explaining it as like, well, it's weird because you were so in tune in the fight and immediately after the fight, and it's only when you went to the back, like maybe it was some sort of adrenaline dump or something like that. And so to me it was like a curiosity of wanting to figure that out, as well as, to be honest, my fiance, again, she's getting her PhD in philosophy, a very smart person, Gabriella Hulsey, who also does sports ethics and that sort of thing. And then also my family and stuff, they were like, you got to go see a neurologist. And I'm like, okay, what better place than this place that I've been wanting to go do this neurovisual stuff at, and maybe they'll be able to also help and see if I, had any issues in my brain. And you guys helped me in such a way that I can't even explain. It was like I felt like I was getting like, I was getting world class neurovisual training and like reparations and you know, and you guys honestly were doing it for, very in a very generous way to me. So I really appreciate all that. And I always sport the Neurological Wellness Institute's logos on my shorts and my fight banner every time I walk out, just because even on my all pro fights, the things that have been live casted on TV, just because I know, how much you guys helped. And I think the thing that I liked the most, when you guys immediately came in, that I went into this evaluation and you guys had me do like 2 hours of different evaluation stuff. And I remember when you came in, you were like, our goal is to get you in here and fix you and never see you again. That's kind of what you said. And I was like, oh, I actually I can tell this guy really wants to help the people, he's working with. And I saw how much great work you guys were doing with a lot of other people who are struggling with um, different neurological issues or things that they need fixed. And in my mind, it almost felt like, okay, my concussion issues aren't even, are kind of small potatoes with this, like some of the almost miracles you guys were performing. But it did feel nice to come in and do a lot of the different training techniques you guys had, because you had a lot of technology where I don't even know how to explain some of the stuff we did, but it felt like I was like competing in these like almost video games. And I never played video games as a kid much, but it was very cool. And to be able to even like compete against, you were like, oh, you actually beat an MLB player on that one, like their scores. And I was like, oh man, I feel like a real athlete now. So so
For
yeah,
sure.
I thought I liked a lot of that stuff, and obviously the gyro thing that you've been around, and I always show that to everyone, and they're like, "Whoa, it's almost like you were training to be a fighter pilot." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, what we do is pretty intense." So yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's where you're ahead of the curve is the future of medicine is the brain,
yeah,
right? And trying to understand the brain, there's only so much that we know. They
yeah.
just the last few months with AI found a significant amount of new brain areas we never knew about,
Oh,
right?
really?
AI modeling, yeah, we used to have 26 areas and 52 and a couple hundred. They now have like 1,600 regions we now know about. So they're learning more and more and more every day. But the biggest change right now is really trying to understand how the connections in your brain manifest as functionality,
I
right? And
see.
when you look at concussions, you don't have to hit your head to be concussed. It's the rotation that's the worst. Because with
Oh, really?
rotation, it causes shearing in the brain. And when we think about the brain, we almost think it's like a football, right? We think pictures and it's like this shape. But the
Yeah,
fact is, before you fix it with the chemical, it's like Jello, right? If you hold the brain within a minute, your fingerprints are in there. If you put it on
right.
a table within a few minutes, it's going to be flat. So the only
Yeah,
reason your brain really has shape is based on the skull and kind of the outer covering.
yeah.
So it's really easy to shear with rotation. And
I
then
see.
with
Okay, I see
and
it.
then you look at concussions in the brain, your brain is all working together as one big network, right? We used to think that this area of the brain does this area of the brain does this. We now know it's a network. They all work together in different networks and it's a unison. And so when you look at what happened to you and your memory encoding, obviously that part got disconnected from the network temporarily,
Yeah,
right? It took time to recover, but you recovered not the best. Like people, the brain recovers, but it doesn't mean it's like hurting an ankle.
yeah,
Eventually, the ankle is going to get better, but if you don't do any rehab, it's not recover the best,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
The brain's interesting because the brain has redundant pathways, right? Where if you injure one pathway, there's other pathways that still do similar things. It might just not do it as well, but that's
right.
deadly for a fighter or
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
high-level athlete because if you use a secondary pathway, you're not going to have the same stability, the balance, right? We saw a really high-level fighter the other day, and I just moved to the left and he fell, right?
yeah.
Just so
Oh,
like
yeah,
you start having different balance issues. And so the idea is what can we do to reconnect the brain functionally? And then what can we do about the environment around the brain? You mentioned not drinking coffee, not doing drug, And so it's like,
yeah,
what can we do with the environment? But the missing piece is what you can do to the brain. And so people are doing more electricity, more lights. But at the end of the day, I always tell people if you hurt your ankle, you can do the best anti-inflammatory protocols in the world, take the best supplements, eat the best diet, you got to rehab the ankle, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's where we're at in the brain is you can do everything with the best stem cells, the best exosomes, the best neuropeptides. But if you're not functionally doing something to change the brain, then it's going to be limited, right? And the nice thing
yeah,
with your scenario is, although you were concussed, it wasn't that bad, but you
Yeah.
calibrated it so it wasn't functionally good. Like you were functioning not great, but the injury wasn't super significant. It's just you recalibrated and you created a compensation in which made you bending over or like with your eyes closed, it gave you a really funky feeling, right? And so
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I remember you took the visual of my eyes, and I remember the way you explained it too. You were like, yeah, your peripheral vision, like if you got through someone threw a kick on this side, you probably wouldn't be able to see it quite as well because of there was sort of that the I could see it, but the brain wouldn't register it quite in time or something like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
your eyes were crossing, right? You look at
Yeah.
something, your eyes would go, "Rup," right? And
Yeah,
they would
yeah,
come right
yeah.
in, which obviously is not the best thing for neurovisual training.
Right, right.
Right. And then obviously we did some hyperbaric and everything like that. But I'm just, again, what threw me off working with a lot of athletes and different people was twofold. It was your brain because it's not just the psychology, but how you move your body, right? You have
Yeah.
about 640 muscles in your body, give or take, and they all work together, right? The way we segregate them and exercise them is a little differently. So you're seeing more functional training. Sometimes it's too functional.
Yeah.
But you gotta get stronger. But at the end of the day, the ability that you have to control your body in 3D space is exceptional. Like it really is, right? I've told you that. We were doing all those different games with bouncing.
Oh
And so
yeah, I remember you were like, you should have been a first baseman, and I was like, what? I was like, no, I'm not that athletic, but I guess
yeah,
you
no,
can.
but your brain is able to pick up cues
Yeah,
really quickly, right? Which is why
yeah,
you're such a good fighter, probably because you're
yeah,
able to predict and see things really, really ahead of the curve.
yeah,
Which again is not just fighting, it's life, right? You're able to
yeah,
kind of predict and see things big picture and able to formulate a plan. And not many people can do that. Not many people can, A, see the big picture, can see it correctly, know the trends moving forward, and then actually formulate a plan and execute it and then stay on track, right? And so that's why I give you a lot of credit knowing you for a little bit, is you've never swayed ever. And I didn't know that history about your family, so that makes a ton of sense for me
yeah, yeah,
because you are a straight line to the
yeah,
goal, right? You know what I mean? And
yeah.
so, and that's why I tell people Lucas beats people before they get in the ring because
Appreciate it.
psychologically and everything, he is just so ahead of the curve that like they don't even know what's about to hit them. In the
Yeah,
first six fights, he said, like, I mean, you were beating people in a minute,
yeah,
and it was
yeah,
going really quick. And I'm
yeah,
thinking to myself, of course, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Just
yeah, yeah.
neurologically, you're so clean and so crisp. It makes a lot of sense of how good you're doing, which I'm really proud of you.
Appreciate that a lot, and you guys are a huge part of that, and your generosity and the way that you guys, even your whole staff, was how well they took care of me and were able to take care of the people that I saw around. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I think my brain is my biggest asset. My brain, my mind, they're really my biggest asset in the fights. Just the way that I strategize, the way that you talked about how I'm able to make adjustments mid fight as well. Um, you know, come up with those plans, come up with those corrections, and act on them. I think that's really there's not that much that separates a lot of the fighters in terms of athletically. Like we're all great athletes. So what makes us different is the way we absorb information, the way we learn techniques, the way we're willing to absorb and learn those techniques. And I think neurological training is the one of the biggest steps to that now.
I've got a good friend. He's a high-level sports psychologist, and he said the di biggest difference between an NBA basketball player and a G League or someone doesn't make it is processing speed, right? It's
Wow.
not their athleticism and it's not their skill, it's their ability to quickly read the game and make the right adjustments, their memory when they hear something, especially under stress or pressure, to remember it. And
Yeah.
he said the biggest difference of why people and the like you said, competition right now is the highest level across the board, right? There's
Yeah.
never been more skilled people in every sport. And
Yeah.
so it even shines even more. The idea of the dumb big athlete is really rare now, right?
Oh
The
yeah.
top level athletes in every sport, these people are sharp, they're
Yeah.
smart, right? And if they're not, or if their behavior is not good anymore, you've got to really be that exceptional to get away with it, right? Because the
Yeah.
next
Right.
guy is up is there, and there's so much talent where you've got to really be on your game, and you've got to have a really good brain. And in your sport, every fight is a risk, right? And so it's how do you keep it up every fight? How do you recover after every fight? Just because, whether it's football, whether it's fighting, whether it's hockey, whether it's even soccer, right? These are all things that every time you're out there, you're putting yourself I even say every sport's a risk, even gaming. And if you want to be good at anything, you've got to risk your health a little bit.
Oh
And so
yeah.
what do you do to compensate for that risk, right? And I think you've done a great job of understanding the risk and putting yourself in the best scenario and having a team where after when you're done, you can kind of put yourself back together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So let's go through a few things.
Sure.
Future for fighting, first of all, what is your goals? What is your future next 3, 5, 10 years? When you look back at your professional career, what do you want to look back at and be proud of?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, like, I think there's a lot you can say about, the goals in MMA, and my personal goals, because I'm obsessive, is like, I want to keep winning in the next year. I try to think about things one fight at a time. I really try not to think too far ahead, because I think it sort of makes the path a little, like, shady. But so right now my goal is to become 8-0. There's a potential fight that might be happening that I can't really announce anything about it yet, but potentially could be a title fight. So we'll see what
Cool.
happens there. But that would be very cool. So that's kind of where I'm focused at now. There's a lot of logistics I have to get figured out with visa issues and those sort of things. But outside of that, long term, like, I have really lofty goals. I mean, I want to be a professional world champion, and really, I want to be a UFC fighter and a world champion at the UFC level. And I think that's a goal that a lot of people have. And I think for me to be able to say that I'm proud of what I did and the mark that I made on the sport, it would be to represent those martial arts that maybe didn't get as much attention back in the, like, 70s and 80s, like, being able to be a good ambassador for the different martial arts that I represent, be a good ambassador for the causes that I think I represent, like Chucky's fight. And I think being someone who inspires other people and shows them that you don't have to be defined by different tragedies that happen to you, but you can actually take things that happen to your life and bring them into your life and create meaning from it. And I think at the end of the day, uh, you know, because I'm a writer, it's kind of like a storytelling thing. Like, I like to sort of have this narrative about my life, but I think if you have a narrative about your own life, you can sort of maybe lend that narrative to other people, and they can use it in a way to make their lives meaningful. So to me, to be able to inspire other people, sort of reshape the way we think about MMA as more intellectual, which I think the sport heavily needs, especially in the fan base. I think those are really lofty goals, but they're, I think, things that are achievable. Like, if you had told me, when I was came down to South Florida, like, 3, 4 years ago, that I would become the top amateur in the country and be 7-0 as a professional. There's a part of me that would have believed you, but there would have been a part of me that also would have been astonished. So I think to just take what I'm doing now, as surreal as it seems, and just keep pushing until it gets more and more surreal, is sort of what I'm trying to do, and inspire people in that process.
Cool. And you mentioned writing, you mentioned philosophy. So when it
Yeah.
comes to philosophy, right? Because I like studying the brain and I'm also like psychology. Like I was doing a PhD in psychology before I had kids. Turns out
Wow. Yeah.
kids are like a ton of work. So I had
Yeah.
to, I had to pause it a little bit, but
Yeah.
I always related to like neurologists and neurology and neuroscientists measure things, right?
Yeah.
And they're trying to objectively measure things to figure out what's true or what's not.
Yeah.
Philosophy is more about theorizing things that you can't
Yeah.
measure, right?
Yeah.
And then the goal is to eventually measure it with scientific ways. But
Yeah.
obviously, the idea of philosophy, because a lot of people have philosophies or ideas that are just wrong. We can measure them,
Oh
right?
yeah.
They're not philosophical anymore. They're science, right? And it's just, and
Yeah.
again, science can be skewed, it can be corrupted, but in
Yeah.
general, sometimes our philosophies are just objectively wrong.
Right.
And then
Right.
other things are things we just don't know about. So, from your perspective, what type of things do you like to think about from a philosophical standpoint? What are the things that interest you? What are the things that kind of, if you had to read about something, what kind of, things do you like?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough too, because it's like, because of the way MMA has been, it's taken up such a large part of my life that I feel bad. Like, I don't read as much as I should and everything like that. But the things, when I revisit, interested me, um, are honestly like metaphysics. So it's sort of the abstract, like a lot of the abstract things, like the study of time, meaning. Like, I didn't like to get in as much to, like, um, my fiance does a lot more of like normative ethics, which is sort of like, she studies like ethical things that are going on right now and those sort of things. Like for me, I liked a lot of the loftier um like questions. And I think philosophy, what it really did for me was like help me organize the way that I thought about things and the way that I organize my thoughts. I think if more people knew about philosophy, they'd understand like logic a little bit better. And logic, I mean, in the terms of like literally symbolic logic. I used to be a logic tutor actually. But it's like, it's one of those things where like it's literally helping you like learn to think in a way that makes sense and is structured, rather than sort of jumping around to things. And I think that that has ultimately, out of everything that philosophy has done, it's helped me almost more than anything is like that structure of thought. And that again, that like Socratic wisdom, like the willingness to accept what I don't know. But for me, honestly, the thing that like has always interested me the most has been existentialism. Um, it's sort of this branch of philosophy that sort of deals a lot with like impermanence and like the absurdity of life. And some people view it as very like pessimistic, but like I view it as actually extremely optimistic. Like I think, they sort of embrace this idea that there's like, uh like radical free will, that you can sort of like create yourself into what you want in some ways. Not in a way of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but more of like a way of like, your mind sort of, it's like a existence before essence in some ways. I found one of the things that Sartre says, who's a famous existentialist philosopher. He kind of says, like we are condemned to be free in a way, and what he means by that is like we have all this free will, and it almost in some ways becomes such a heavy responsibility for people that they sort of don't want to accept that idea. And so um and so they kind of like use other methods to sort of obfuscate their free will. And like um for me, I've always found that, I think uh like existentialism brought something else to me too, where like they talk a lot about in existentialism, like Friedrich Nietzsche, who was like kind of the first existentialist philosopher. And he also was a little bit of a nihilist, but he talked about this idea of God is dead. And like, people get really their backs up when they like you say that, because it sounds like a religious statement. But he was more just saying that like people can't use these outside things to garner meaning from their lives anymore, like religion. And like later, Albert Camus, who is my favorite philosopher, went on to say that like, yeah, we need to garner meaning for ourselves. Like we need to, embrace things that are impermanent and find meaning in those. And he had this quote where he said, "We must imagine Sisyphus happy." And what he means by that is like, if you know Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus is this guy who rolls the rock up the hill over and over, and then it goes all the way back down. Um, and so what he means by that is that it's not the end goal of the putting the rock up there, the permanent thing. It's more the process that you gather meaning from. Like you have to decide that you get meaning from it, and that's how where happiness comes, and that's where meaning in life comes. And so for me, it's been one of those things of just like it helped to really direct my life in a way where when I see things that are, whether they're permanent or impermanent, I try to embrace the impermanent a little bit more than I used to. Like again, it's kind of comes back to being vulnerable. Like when I see, whether it's a relationship that could end one day, like all of this is very fragile. Like whether it's, people that you could, be stay friends with or not stay friends with. Like there's all these different things that are impermanent in life that you want to try to invest in. And existentialism is kind of that idea that you should invest in it and you should embrace the absurdity of that and bring meaning to life. And anything that's sort of holding out for more of a permanence is maybe not the best way to spend your life, because it's not going to really bring true meaning to it.
I like it. And I think there's been a larger, well, it's shifting. We've had
Yeah.
such a movement in science, right? And science is amazing, but
Oh
there's
yeah.
such a bias that science is telling us everything. We know everything. It's all
Yeah.
science, follow the science. Hey,
Yeah.
sometimes the science is wrong.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of science we just don't know, right?
Right,
There's
right.
so much we don't know. And if you don't have a theory or a philosophy and you're just always trusting the experts and the scientists,
Yeah,
next thing you know, you might over rely on money or over rely on your job or over rely on these different material things
yeah,
that maybe I heard a quote the other day. It was from a nurse, and her job was dealing with people before they died. It was like the top 10 things people say before they die. And one of the things was stop waiting for tomorrow to be happy.
yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. So it's just understand that you're going to be searching forever. Before you know it, you're going to be about to die, still waiting for the future to be happy.
Right, right, yeah,
Thinking that I'm only be happy when I have this much money, or when I could support my kids, or when I could do this. And there's an underlying void sometimes of a deeper meaning of life. And I
yeah,
think in America, especially, not many people, though it's getting better, are asking those type of questions. And there's a lot of research on consciousness, right? And the idea of consciousness has always been throughout history, from the oldest time to now, our argument's not different, right? Because consciousness and manifestation of brain activity that we fool ourselves to think we're more special than we are,
yeah,
or is consciousness something that happened before we were born, after we
yeah,
die, and is actually maybe not even in our body, right? And there's different scientists who have these different quantum models that show these parts of our cell that are more like quantum antennas that
yeah,
are actually taking energy and they're kind of coming down into the body. And even memory, you mentioned memory, they still don't know where long-term memory is in the brain, right? We know where memory is from short-term to long-term. We know how it converts. But when it comes to long-term memory, they think it's almost like an infinite Google Drive or like a cloud, right? And you have this almost like infinite ability to save things in the cloud. The hardest thing is how to get it into the cloud and
yeah,
how to
yeah,
pull it
right.
back. But they've done lesions of all different areas of the brain, and they can't, there's no one area of the brain they could take out and get rid of your long-term memory.
Wow. Huh.
And so again, they ask the question is maybe our memory is in like some type of cloud system,
Yeah, some
some type
sort of
of
like
blockchain system that we're all connected to, or something, that we're all,
communal space. Yeah.
but there's a lot to do with this consciousness field, this energy field, like why when people meditate in the groups, do things get better? Like there's all
Yeah,
this
yeah.
different research on monks and monks being able to increase their brain to a level we didn't think was possible.
Right, yeah.
So it's interesting because the guy just wrote an article about this saying right now science is trying to encode the brain to reverse engineer it, right? And they want to put chips in, they want to modify it for good and bad
Yeah,
reasons, probably.
yeah,
But what happens when they encode the areas of the brain that take in consciousness? Because
I
I'm under
see.
the opinion that realistically, I believe in a soul. And I could be wrong,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah,
I tend to believe in a soul. I tend to believe in this energy that makes
yeah,
us all unique, and our brain is more of like the operating system that
yeah,
allows our soul to kind of manifest, our free will to manifest. But if we know which areas of the brain light up that interpret that, will we end up being in some sci-fi movie where we can take that soul out, right?
yeah,
In a
right. I
different
see.
body at some point, because if we can understand how it gets in and how it gets out, and
Yeah,
then we can manipulate that with electricity or with technology or with chips, it's inevitable, in my opinion. I don't know
yeah,
if I'll be
yeah.
alive for that, but I think it's inevitable, which is insane, right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, I mean, I do think like what you're saying because I mean, it's weird. People almost ask me like sometimes, "Are you religious?" And like, I almost like because they see how much I talk about philosophy, and that's so it's a kind of a natural question that comes from it. I think like even my twin brother minored in philosophy, no, in religion. Like, it's one of those things where I say like, yeah, in a way, I was brought up Roman Catholic, but like, there's also just this aspect of like I think it's all one. It's like there's like a quantum entanglement aspect that I think we don't quite understand, but it probably ties into a lot of our religious beliefs of like it's sort of our way of explaining like what was going on. But and now we're explaining it sort of through quantum entanglement, which is more factual, but like we still don't know a lot of things about it. It's not might as well be magic, but like because we know more about it than that. But I think yeah, I think there's a really meaningful and like almost sacred and holy way of explaining this stuff that is actually like very tied into quantum entanglement as well. So yeah,
I
I
agree.
agree.
And I
Yeah,
got into this probably around 2007 is when I started reading about everything. And what's
yeah,
interesting for me is I've read all types of crazy things, right? From
yeah, yeah,
insiders to whistleblowers to
yeah, yeah,
philosophers to everything,
yeah,
right? And 20 years later or so, it's been interesting to see it manifest. I think
yeah.
COVID accelerated a little bit because it caused people to question the reality a little more.
Right, yeah,
But
yeah,
it's a reality that people's level of knowledge and consciousness is higher, and there's more information everywhere, both good and bad. But it
Yeah.
seems like more people are having conversations that seem foreign 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This conversation we're having now, 20 years ago, would be blasphemy. Right? But
Right.
now this is what
Yeah.
people are looking for. They're looking for deeper meaning in life because
Yeah.
as the world goes down, as inflation goes up, as people's jobs get worse, as there's more wars, sometimes you got to look around and be like, what is, at some point you break out of it. It was like the Matrix, and you
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
figure out kind of like, what is happening? Where do I fit in? And how do I make meaning of this, right? How do I make
Yeah.
meaning to myself? Because if I create meaning off of external things, I'm really vulnerable. And that's where the fighting is interesting to me. Although I'm not a fighter, it
Yeah.
almost forces discipline. It
Yeah.
forces almost an internal dialogue and it
Yeah.
forces a creation of meaning that's almost above yourself to be disciplined. Right.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's interesting when I talk to a lot of fighters, right? They're much more intellectual, friendly, and philosophical sometimes than I expect right?
Yeah.
And a lot of them have strong personal beliefs, religious beliefs, and this belief in their soul, themselves, and like it's almost existential, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
So let me ask you this to finish up.
Yeah.
If you were not going to be a fighter and not going to be a writer or a philosopher, what do you think you'd be doing right now with your life?
Ooh, if I was not a writer or philosopher, I mean, yeah, so like after this, I think I'm gonna write probably, but I don't know. I mean, I would have to think really hard about it. It would probably be something that like ends up, you know, bringing out the virtues that I think are the best. I think I'd probably still want to compete in some way. I have this kind of crazy theory because pickleball is a new sport and I've never tried it, but I was always very good at Foursquare. So I
Okay.
think, and like ping pong. So I think like because it's such a new sport, I could probably become the best pickleball player in the world. But
Right.
I've never played it.
But you're
But in
confident right
reality,
now, if you could do
yeah,
another thing in your life, you'd be a
yeah,
professional pickleball player.
yeah, maybe no,
Just don't piss you
but
off. Max does.
but to be honest, I think I'd probably be doing some sort of either philanthropy and helping with my parents' charity or honestly psychology always I always say like, if I didn't take life, death and meaning with Professor Partridge in philosophy class, if I had taken a psychology class before that maybe I might have gotten steered into no I mean a psychology class I would have gotten steered into psychology. I remember I did take one psychology class, social psychology. Um, and that was like honestly one of the best I've ever done in a course because it really, you know, appealed to me. So I think, I'd probably be doing something in psychology. I don't know what it would be. Maybe, it's funny. Like, I always say like, some people recommend, they're like, oh man, you should be a therapist. And when I tell my fiance this, she's like horrified. She's like, here's a therapist. What do you mean?
It's funny. I'm married, right? And
Yeah.
look,
Yeah.
sometimes, all the time, my
Yeah.
wife's view on me is different than other people's view on me.
Yeah. 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 Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Not that
Yeah.
she has a bad view on me, but sometimes she'll say
Yeah.
things
No,
and
no.
tell about it.
Just,
She
yeah.
looks at me
It's,
like, "What they
yeah.
say about you?"
Yeah. It's,
I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a good person, you know."
yeah.
All
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
It's
So,
funny. Yeah.
favorite book or movie?
Favorite book or movie? Ooh, that's tough. I mean, honestly, my favorite book, and it's messed up, but it's The Fall by Albert Camus. I
Okay.
just really like that book philosophically.
What's it about?
It's basically, I mean, it's gonna sound morbid, but it's basically this guy's like um, sort of descent into madness, like in a way.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, it's a interesting book because it ties in a lot of like existential themes and like basically the guy does everything like you shouldn't do if you're trying to be a good existentialist and yeah, it sort of like shows what he ends up becoming from that.
Not that long ago, some of the best is common, right? Syphilis and things like that made everyone
Yeah,
crazy, right? You look at
yeah,
Van
yeah,
Gogh and
yeah,
some of his paintings. I mean, he had vertigo and dizziness, and so like
yeah,
people look at the stretched art he has. That
yeah,
was his reality. He had visual problems, right? And so
yeah,
he was drawing what he was seeing, but to the normal person, it looked majestic.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, so that's it. How about movie?
movie. It's a tough one. I really like, honestly, just because I grew up with it, was like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly.
Okay.
It's like the Western movie my dad, but it's like I feel like um, for a Western, like you think it's just like, guns and cowboys, but it's really like I thought it has a lot more meaning in it than other people do. It's like I kind of think it has a lot of you know um like shows a lot of like more about like personality and relationships than I think like in a way that I think probably wasn't as normal back then in like action movies or westerns.
For sure. And then final one. If you had to go to dinner with any person dead or alive, who would you like to go to dinner with, and what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean that's tough. Like obviously, I mean there's like like hmm. I think I would probably go with yeah, I'd probably go with Albert Camus just to pick his brain and sort of like existentialist stuff. But I mean, if you're asking like personally, of course I would go with, past loved ones. But
Yeah.
but uh but in terms of like you're saying like a historical figure or something, I guess it'd probably be Albert Camus. He died in a really like not mysterious way, but he passed away too in a car accident and when he was like I think in his 30s too, so it was a very like early passing. And I remember his greatest like existential rival, this guy Jean-Paul Sartre, ended up saying about his death. He said like he probably was my last true friend. So I feel like there was a lot of like meaning there between the two of them, but they also were somehow like enemies that didn't talk the last couple of years of their life. So I'd be interested to learn a lot about that and like where their disagreements came from exactly and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, man, that's awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time. We're huge
Yeah.
fans. We're really honored to be part of your team, and I'm really happy that we were able to be beneficial in your life.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm really proud of everything you're doing. And honestly, you do everything the right way. Like, and I didn't know you as well. I learned more about you today than ever known. But I see a lot of people with different things, and right off the bat, I knew you were unique. And the more we worked together, the more I knew you were unique. And then today, like I said, you've got a brain that's unique, which allows you to be successful in anything you want to do, right? Because you do everything the right way. So I'm really appreciative of you and your time, and I'm glad you're able to share some knowledge with everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And I didn't know that about, you and I knew you had said before, you were like a high level, like basketball player. And I could tell like there, I was like, this guy's different. Like he does have that competitive like thing about him. But I think that's really interesting. The more I learned about, you and how you had to sort of like contemplate a lot of existential questions at such a young age. That's interesting. And I'm glad you're better now, obviously. So,
Appreciate it. Yeah, I try to focus on the patient. I try not to talk about myself, but people told
no,
me I
I
need to start
understand.
doing this podcast. So I've been
Yeah.
coerced into
Yeah.
being on
Yeah.
cast and
Yeah.
talking about myself, which I
No,
don't
it's
love to
interesting.
do.
No,
But I'm really appreciative of you taking the time. And anytime you're around, come on in.
oh, for sure. Thank you so much.
No problem. Have a great night.
You too.